Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Atom, or A Touch of Multiplatform. I'm Justin Mancinelli from Touchlab, here as always with my co-host Pamela. Before we introduce our guest, I've got to say I've seen talks, I've read articles, and I'm otherwise aware of many people in the mobile community, but of course, I don't know of everyone, so my awkward confession for today is that I hadn't heard of today's guest until Pamela suggested we bring her on the show. And as I read her bio, I instantly became a fan. That got Pamela and I thinking of who other women in the mobile community we are super fans of, and in no particular order. Some of the women in mobile I'm a huge fan of are Hui Tian Dao, Anise Davis, Ellen Shapiro, and Christina Lee. Who would you confess to be super fanning over, Pamela?
Hi, folks. My name is Pamela Hill. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains. And so when I was interviewing at JetBrains, I was fortunate enough to be interviewed by Sveta Isakova. And she wrote the book called Kotlin in Action. And I had such a fangirl moment when she was interviewing me. We were nerding out over Kotlin, and that was like a really awesome moment. But I definitely second all the ladies that you mentioned, Justin. They're awesome developers. So definitely. Allie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Allie Ogden, and I've been working at Swappa for about 7 years now. And I used to work at other small companies, but I just love doing Android development. First is where I started, and once they adopted Kotlin, I started using Kotlin and never looked back because it's beautiful.
Amazing.
Should I also say who I'm a super fan of?
Oh, yeah, you can.
So I would say about the only lady that I have fangirled over would be Diane Hackborn, who is like the number one woman in the Android world that you just look at and you're like, wow, she's amazing. Yeah, but I also have a lot of other friends in the Android world that I love dearly and think they're amazing developers, like Adrian Park and Maria Neumeier. I love those women too, and of course Lee. And
yes.
all the women that Justin mentioned, I also am big fans of them.
It's amazing. So we were wondering, because on Android Study Group, your picture is of you eating something, and we were wondering if there was something on your food bucket list, something interesting that you've always wanted to eat, but maybe haven't had the chance to.
Oh, so first of all, in the picture, I am eating a Döner in Germany, and a Döner is like the most delicious street food that you're gonna get there because it's so good. That's why that's in my picture. But I don't really have any food bucket list items other than that, but I would like to eventually be able to bake a pie very well in my own oven, because I've tried many, many times, and I also tried other people's ovens, and it works perfectly in other people's ovens. Every single time I've tried. I got a countertop toaster oven, comes out perfectly. I can't do it in my own oven. So that's my bucket list goal, is to finally get a pie to come out well in my own oven.
So it begs the question of whether you're going to like invest in an air fryer just to get a pie
So the have the on the counter toaster oven that has convection baking in it, and that was one of the things that made me try it, because I thought maybe the convection will help it bake better and the butter will come leaking out. And so I tried it and I said, oh my God, it worked first try. And so that's how I've been baking the pies when I need to. But It's so silly to have this countertop oven when I have a full-size oven right there that I apparently can't get a pie to come out well in.
Well, what works is what works, as long as it tastes good. Like
it tastes good no matter what.
I believe it.
Whether it makes a mess and how easy it is to cut.
Yep. My wife was a pastry chef, so she's always complaining about our ovens versus the stuff that she's worked with before. I definitely recommend whatever your friends are using. You should just get a kitchen full of ovens of whatever your friends have. Let's go back to Swappa. What is Swappa working on?
So Swappa is a company that creates an online marketplace for used devices, and it serves the US market. So to the international viewers, you may not have heard of it before, or you may not be able to use it because it's just US marketplace. But users will create listings for their devices that they want to sell, and then other users can browse the listings, and they're all classified based on which product it is. So they go to the MacBook Pro 2021 listing, and you would be able to browse the different listings by that product type. And so they're all neatly organized, which makes finding a used device a lot easier than some of the competitors that we have.
That's super cool. Is there anything like really interesting or challenging in this space?
So it tends to be general e-commerce issues. I guess the most challenging thing right now is that we've used PayPal as our payments provider for a long time, and they come with issues just being PayPal. Hopefully, hopefully no one gets mad at me for saying that, but I would say our biggest struggle is usually working with our payment providers. And so hopefully we can expand and try new ones and weigh the pros and cons of any of them. Maybe have a happier life with multiple choices.
So you're a solo mobile developer at Swappa. And I can imagine that it takes quite a lot of like intentionality to grow your skills. There's no one to really like have a little lunch and learn with, or do code reviews and like geek out over the new architecture components or whatever. So for folks in a similar situation, what advice could you give them to sort of learn to grow their skills?
So you have to go out on your own and find the motivation to learn new things, because it is really easy to just get stuck doing what you know you could do and say, I've done it this way before. I know it works. Keep doing it. So you have to have the news coming to you so that you can uh, learn what is out there, because there's no one to suggest it. So the number one suggestion is to find a community of people who will suggest it to you. So you don't have to have your community of people who can teach you through your colleagues at work. You can go find a community elsewhere. I know a lot of people use Twitter. I use Slack as my networking to stay in touch with people, and RSS feeds, just anything that keeps the news coming to you so that you don't have to go find it on a specific internet page. Like, keep up with all the updates of the new releases and everything. If they just show up in a feed, that's the easiest way to keep up with it. And then also, you have to have the motivation and curiosity to actually just try implementing the new things that you see have come out. So find a way to apply it in a personal project or in your work project. And then go for it.
That's fantastic advice. That's, for some people it works different ways, but I think what's common from everybody that I've talked to is like, you just got to start making it, because you can't just keep reading books and tutorials and listening to other people. You just gotta go for it, like you said. I'm glad you mentioned Slack. JetBrains is Kotlin Lang, where the community is always in there and so helpful. And thank you to JetBrains for keeping that running for all these years. there's so many people in there. I can't believe how well that has gone. And RSS feeds, definitely. It is not a dead technology. Thank you for bringing that up. You are also, it's not just being a solo dev, but being a solo dev in Kotlin Multiplatform. Like, that's new technology. There's not much documentation and blog posts about it, though it continues to grow. How are you finding learning about Kotlin Multiplatform, and how does that help you as a solo dev using Kotlin Multiplatform?
So one of the things you mentioned was the Kotlin Lang Slack, and I actually am not in the Slack, but one of the great things is that it's indexed by Google, so the conversations show up in Google search. So whenever I go in and I Google for some specific issue, sometimes I'll see it in the Kotlin Lang Slack, and I just go there and read a little bit of the surrounding conversation, and I can see if it can solve my problem. Usually it doesn't, sorry. But it is fun to see that other people are having the same issues that I am, which is usually with the alpha tooling that they have, and sometimes things break. And there's just not a fix but wait and hope it gets better or find some other way to do it.
So how does Kotlin Multiplatform support you as a solo developer building Android and iOS together?
So because I am an Android developer, I don't really have much background in iOS at all. And so my company came to me asking if I could try to find some way to do multi-platform. And my manager and I were always really looking forward to the Kotlin multi-platform as soon as it was announced, because we thought this sounds so much better than the solutions that are out there right now. So I started looking into it and researching it and thinking, this is perfect. I'm excited to try this. And so I started using it, and I was able to learn just enough iOS that I could get an iOS app really functional and able to release to production. And I didn't have to learn all the other stuff that you have to learn to become an iOS developer. So now I guess I would say that I'm an Android developer and an iOS-lite developer. And so well, it's great because as a solo developer, I don't have to have expertise in both platforms, the entire full stack of both of them. I just have my already existing expertise in Android, and I can build slowly to iOS expertise. And I can still create something really functional with just my existing knowledge base.
Great. So you mentioned that you started with, so you started at Swappa, you started with an Android app and you eventually used Kotlin Multiplatform to create an iOS app. Can you tell us a little bit more about your process? What were the steps that you had to take?
Yeah, so with my Android app, I was using all the popular libraries that everyone on Android always uses, like Retrofit and uh, Dagger all over and Moshi or Moshi. I'm guessing Moshi. But and and RX Java, and I was just using all those really popular libraries. And so because what I really wanted to do was get my network stack on multi-platform, what I had to do was I had to transition off of those libraries and onto Kotlin multi-platform libraries. So I the way that I started was to do that transition and replace Retrofit with Ktor and replace Moshi with the Kotlin X serialization library. And so I was just going through and replacing everything that I needed to do in order for it to work with Kotlin multi-platform. And so it wasn't Android specific. So that was the first big step. Big step was to make it so that it was compatible with KMM. And then from there, I used the templates in the IDE to create the iOS module. And I was then able uh, to just modify that template until I got the iOS app going and could get it to the point where I could properly develop new features on it. And then I went from there. I was able to call my network calls through the iOS app that I was creating, and it was pretty good from there.
You mentioned using the templates in the IDEs. What IDEs were you using?
So I was using Android Studio, and that one has it had all the templates that I needed to create the multi-platform library within that. And then at that point, when I started the iOS app, I tried using Xcode. And as an Android developer, I looked at Xcode and I said, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I couldn't even figure out how to open a file. It was just complicated to me. And so I said, if you guys want this iOS app quickly, we need a JetBrains IDE on this because I just cannot learn another IDE and another language and another platform all at the same time. So my manager said, okay, we'll get you an Appcode license. And I was so much faster because when I started working with Appcode, I said, okay, I actually know how to use this IDE. And so it was really nice to be able to use an IDE that I already had experience with. And then I was very disappointed when I heard they were discontinuing Appcode.
Well, one, you're not alone in not knowing what to do with Xcode. There's even iOS developers that I talk to. they're like, when they use another IDE, they're like, this is actually much better than what Apple is putting out. Although, they do get used to it and they know exactly what
Yeah,
to
they
do,
say
which
I
is
love Xcode because I know how to use it. And you know what? It's the
Mm,
same for me. I love the JetBrains IDE because I know how to use it. It's fast and it's efficient for me to use what I'm used to.
yeah.
mm.
And then as for Appcode, what were some of the essential features as part of it that you were like, I'm feeling bad about this getting discontinued. I hope they can bring back pieces of this into their other IDs.
So I mean, the big thing is just that it is what I'm used to, but also that I could run my iOS app from the IDE. I wasn't able to use it very well for the project settings, and so there were times I had to go to Xcode in order to easily edit things or to release the app. And there were a few things I had to use Xcode for, but code made it a lot easier to do the day-to-day work of code editing and testing my designs, what I came up with, testing of the code running. And uh, I don't know if the multi-platform plugin ever particularly worked very well on Appcode. And a lot of times I didn't have great autocomplete all the time, but it still had the most important things like refactoring and being able to navigate the code well.
Mm. So, what advice would you give Android and Kotlin developers that are creating these Kotlin multi-platform APIs for their iOS teammates? What advice would you give to them so that they're a little bit kinder to their friends, their iOS friends?
So the only like real main thing that I had to do in order to make my calls work really well on iOS was that I had to make specific calls for the native calls that had error handling included. And also, so I had it throw an exception whenever it was going to be an iOS call, and like just annotated throws exception. And then I also passed in a loading state that would include the actual user displayable error that they needed. So I would just so the solution that I personally chose was to pass in a pair of data, which was first the data that I wanted the that I wanted the app to receive, and then the loading state. And the loading state would be whether it's loaded or not, and then the loading state error would include the user displayable error that I wanted to pass, so that in iOS I had access to all the information that I needed to make the display make sense for the user.
Mhm. So earlier you were talking about your iOS-lite knowledge. What advice would you give to what do you think is the bare minimum? You don't always want to talk about the bare minimum of knowledge, but sometimes you have to be practical. You know, learning iOS it's a big is a big deal. It's a lot of work. What what kind of knowledge would you recommend to an Android developer to have about iOS so that they can work well with Kotlin Multiplatform?
You know what? I embrace the bare minimum, as when you're on a deadline, you need the bare minimum. You need the smallest thing that you can get to work well and get it out there. So
Mhm.
I love having the bare minimum.
I'm
Uh,
100% with you on that one.
so I would say that my iOS app consists of the app delegate that I need in order to receive notifications and Google sign in, and the component that calls Swift UI from there. And then at that point, it's all Swift UI all the way down, which is very similar to Compose. I mean, they each have intricacies that are slightly different, but I've learned them both at the same time. I learned Compose and Swift UI like in parallel.
That's cool.
Mm.
So it's pretty interesting. And then sometimes I go to do Compose and I type in VStack. I'm like, oh man, wrong one. Supposed to be doing columns and rows here, and I'm doing VStacks and HStacks. But I mean, if you can easily substitute names like that, then they're really similar and easy to use. Uh, so I call Swift UI from there, and so I just make my network calls from view models, and I display them on the Swift UI views. And I did have to implement my own custom navigation, which uses a navigation library, but maybe it's better now. I hadn't looked at it since the new Swift stuff came out. But I mean, it's very little. The app delegate's one class long, and apps one class long. It all fits in one file, very minimal. And so learning Swift and Swift UI was it. And I didn't have to learn that much. There's one of the big things to learn is that a map is called a dictionary. And
Mm.
because it doesn't say it in there, it's just
Why does
symbols.
every language have to rename what a dictionary or a map?
So how do you Google it when it's just symbols? I don't know. I like that Kotlin uses more words now as opposed to random symbols.
Mm.
Um, Besides the language, what do you find the most challenging about putting KMP into production?
What is the most challenging thing? I mean, I don't remember what you asked for besides but I'm thinking the build configuration is
There you
always
go.
the hardest.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely.
What makes build configuration so hard?
so the first thing that made it hard was that on my Android app, had different build configurations for staging and production data for the calls to the API. So I did have to search for answers to that, and I solved it by using a library called build config with a K, because it's the Kotlin thing. And so I was able to get the staging and production data configured by using build config, and I use it for a couple of other things as well now, since I'm already using it anyway. Uh, and so that did solve the biggest problem that I had. But just challenging things. There's just sometimes things break, and right now I have that issue where it says that it's with when we switched to Gradle 8, we started having issues with uh, the build, I think the names of the configurations and the Kotlin Multiplatform plugin was creating uh, configurations with the same name, and so the build was erroring out, and so that's the big problem right now. And things just break like that, and you either wait until they're fixed or you find workarounds for them. And in this case, found a workaround until it's fixed. Uh, and you just keep trucking on like you do with anything, because everything has build configuration issues. You're never gonna have a super easy time setting up your configuration.
Yep, one of those tautologies in software development, whether it's back end or front end or mobile, it's always build configuration causing some issues. With
And
Kotlin
it's a
multi,
pain. It's a pain because you always want to be doing the fun stuff of just
that's right.
coding, and you're like, I want to work on my features, I want to work on fixing the bugs, but you're just stuck. So
Yep,
it's
yep.
the way
Going
it
back
goes.
into Gradle tasks or make files or something. That um, you were talking about migrating some of your networking stack, and that gets into interoperability of like from the iOS and the shared Kotlin side. So are there any interop issues that you've encountered, and how did you overcome those?
So the the big problems that I had may have only been applicable on the old memory management system that they had, because I haven't run into it since then, but I used to always have the issues with the frozen objects. And you're using immutable objects and you want to change them, and I can't. And so, for instance, I was implementing authorization with bearer tokens, and the the included Kotlin X, I think the KTOR bearer token authorization plugin, it just didn't work. So I had to like copy and paste the class and make changes on it to make it work. And I was using it, and I would always get the frozen issue, and it wouldn't update the token properly. And so there was a huge struggle with authorization. It took a couple weeks for me probably to get it all ironed out so that it works. And you know, you just had things like that. I'm really hoping that all those struggles are fixed now with the new native memory management that I think they've released now.
Mhm. Yeah. And in terms of like debugging crashes for iOS in production, what is your strategy there? Did you encounter any crashes? No crashes whatsoever, or
It runs perfectly every time. I must be the perfect
wonderful.
developer. Uh, so a lot of times whenever someone reports an issue that may not necessarily be a crash, one of the really cool things about Kotlin Multiplatform is that I can pretty easily see whether it's an issue in the shared code or if it's an issue with just a single platform by comparing the results on the two phones. Because they share code base, if it's broken on both phones, it's broken on the shared stuff. It's broken on only one phone, it's broken on just one platform. And so you can use that to help you figure out whether it is something that maybe the API can fix, because, the shared code for networking is pretty simple. API probably broke it. Uh, and or whether it's something that it's really down to you as the only developer to fix the problem that you created. I also like to have QA try to reproduce things, and I try to use the Xcode crash reporting for crashes. Uh, it's it's hard because I don't know how to use Xcode, and the stacks and always come back a mess. I'm like, I don't know how to read this because I'm iOS-lite. So hopefully QA can reproduce it so I can see when I'm actually fixing it or not. But I do try my best, and I'm usually okay at getting the crashes fixed.
So we've mentioned several challenges, and you're finding workarounds for them as an expert developer should do. This is awesome. I love hearing because we want to be honest about all these things that we're running into. Every developer is running into these things, and that's part of just being a professional is being able to figure it out, work around it, and Kotlin
That's why they
Multiplatform.
pay us instead of using the AI to fix it.
There you go. And then so with these challenges, there was something interesting you wrote in the we always send questions to our guests beforehand, and one of the answers you gave was that in general people don't notice that you're using Kotlin multi-platform, and I really love that. So even with these challenges, do you think that is making it worth using Kotlin multi-platform?
I think that makes Kotlin Multiplatform the solution and that the users don't notice because what what you strive for is the native feel. You want the user to feel at home and happy on his or her own device. And so if you're using something that makes it feel clunky and weird and people can say right away, "Oh, that's React Native. Oh, that's Electron," then is that really the solution that you want? It feels like a sad cost-saving solution that you make compromises for. And
Or
so
an AI wrote this?
And so one of the things that makes Kotlin multi-platform great is that it feels like you're not really making compromises because the user is happy because the user feels at home. And so, I mean, it's perfect. It's great. I love it.
Great. So, in your biography, you mentioned that you have this degree in German, and I recently read an article. It was about a study where they were saying that language aptitude actually plays a bigger role in learning a new programming language than things like number skills. What are your thoughts on this study or the results of the study?
Well, so first of all, number skills are used very rarely in most everyday programming. I mean, there are obviously people who do a lot of math in their everyday jobs, like the graphics people. But as people just making apps, unless we're getting really granular into how we want our display to come out, we're not really doing math that much. And most of what we're doing is talking to the computer and to the compiler using their own language. So we have to learn that language. But also when I read that article and it was very very focused on the beginning stages of learning, which so that makes sense that being able to pick up languages quickly and follow patterns of how people speak would really lead into learning a new programming language because that really is most of what you're learning. They're not doing a lot of problem solving and like just deeper critical think. I'm not saying that not knowing a new language isn't good for critical thinking, but just the directly translatable skills of learning a new language in real life is like learning a new language in programming because you're just following the grammar, you're following the grammatical rules. Uh, but as for the traits that make somebody a good software engineer, I think that things like willing to try new things and fail at them and see what works and what doesn't is one of the traits. And being able to look for your own answers instead of giving up right away, which leads into persistence and being willing to read the docs sometimes. That's one of the hard ones. You
That's
just
that's a
sometimes you
hard
just
pill to swallow, Ali.
I know sometimes you want to just try things, but really understanding how the system works, sometimes you have to read the docs or decompile the code and read the decompiled code from your IDE that shows it nicely for you. Uh, you just have to really understand how something works if you're going to call it sometimes. And being able to build a mental model and keep a keep a model of everything that's happening in your head so that you can build onto it properly.
So you're also a big proponent for remote work. So how do you find it? Big proponent. How do you find building a connection with colleagues and members of the community? How do you do that in a remote kind of environment?
So I love async communication because it is a wonderful way to work and it's a wonderful way to communicate with people. One of my favorite things is that sometimes you get a little emotional about the things that other people say. And in meetings, if you get emotional about something, you have an emotional reaction, which is not conducive to a good working environment. So if you're async, you can calm down, you can think about it a little bit, you can think about a way to say it that it'll be well received, and you actually make progress on the thing that you're upset about happening instead of just degrading into some kind of yelling war about everyone wants their own way. So something that I really try to do is to not respond emotionally to a lot of things. And being remote is great for that, just because you get a message and you can read it and then you can just wait and you're okay. And then I like to also not blame individuals for anything that goes wrong. That's one of the things I always work on doing is trying to trying to word things in such a way that people don't feel like I'm blaming them, and compliment them anytime that they do deliver something for you.
Absolutely. Those skills are so important because in remote work you don't have uh that everyday, like, I know you, I know that's not what you're like kind of connection or like relationship. But if you are friendly and you are positive in your PRs, for example, and you're like complimenting them about their critical thinking skills or the way that they handle the situation, that really does build rapport. So I think it's really important to very much conduct yourself really uh, um, in a very I don't know really what word I would use, but a very sort of proactive and positive way in remote work. And with remote work, you almost can sort of step aside from your emotions, like you were saying, and just so like what will be the most practical way to convey my message to this person.
Exactly. And I also I know a lot of people say that they always want to be friends with their coworkers, but I think your friends should be in your real life, and you should be able to work really well with your coworkers to solve problems. And just you don't have to be friends and go out for drinks and everything. You just have to be able to work well together. And so I find that my favorite coworkers are the ones who I feel are really reading what I'm writing and really listening to me, and able to have a dialogue with me about what the best solution is, maybe even though it's not spoken, it's written words. It's you could still really tell when people are listening instead of just going off on their own tangents.
Mm,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah. On the emotional side of things, I can't tell you, not just in meetings, but even with emails and Slacks, it is like so nice that you can rewrite something a few times and be like, am I being too ranty here? Am I really
Ask for
saying
feedback
what I need
from
to
your
say?
partner.
Yeah, all of that. One of the I'm going to bring up another woman in tech that I'm a big fan of is Laura Hogan. Um, she talks about amygdala hijacking a lot and how to work with people, especially when you're managing teams. I would definitely recommend reading a bunch of her stuff. And then I wanted to ask you, Allie, about with going back to Kotlin Multiplatform. What are some resources? Where do you like to go to get information that's helping you learn about Kotlin Multiplatform?
So a lot of times Slack would be an easy way to go to find other people who are also working with multi-platform because there are so few people out there. Stack Overflow doesn't usually have great solutions to anything multi-platform that I've had. Whenever you're just starting out, uh, TouchLab, just go there and look at the code samples because I mean, TouchLab was like the first big investment in actually using Kotlin Multiplatform, so they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of information to share. And uh, just Googling it and seeing if anything comes up is really the answer. Hopefully someone else has experienced it before and wrote a blog post.
Always good. And hopefully it's recent and nothing has changed in the meantime.
I know. Everything changes.
Just hoping for the best here.
Yeah. I mean, usually the answer ends up being solve it yourself, but
and then write a blog
to,
post about how you solved it.
It's good to feel like other people are having similar struggles as you are. That it helps you a little bit along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Or you write a Stack Overflow message and you discover it years later solving your own problem again. I wanted to ask you about Kotlin Multiplatform open source libraries and contributors that you'd like to give a shout out to or thanks to. Anybody in particular that you'd like to say thank you to?
So I'm a big user of the Kotlin X libraries. I especially use datetime. So love seeing the progress on datetime as that becomes better and better. Because I work on an e-commerce app, I also use a big num library by IonSpin. Very important because I'm calculating fees and totals and stuff like that. Gotta have big decimal. And then also I use a settings library so that I didn't have to learn how to do iOS settings. It's a shared pref/settings library that does it all in one by Russ H. Wolf. And then obviously, as I previously mentioned, I use build config, and I'm not going to attempt to say the GitHub username, but I did see that there's a real name after the GitHub username, and it says it's by Yasuhiro Shimizu.
Okay. So you were mentioning datetime. Are there any specific features that you're looking forward to hearing about and seeing in datetime and anytime soon? Or you're perfectly happy?
I think they solved all my problems.
Wonderful.
Because I did have problems once upon a time, but if they had better display, I think if
That's
they
a
had
common one. I
better
think so
display
too.
stuff like the formatting, yeah. But I forgot I solved it. But it is nice for the future if it makes it easier for different ways to display the times. That'd be a nice feature add.
I think so too. Well, folks, that's all for today. Thank you to our audience for watching. Remember to like our video if you enjoyed this episode. Also, a big thank you to Allie from Swappa for joining us today. You're so awesome. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.